Good afternoon. Welcome to episode 46 of Duval Rundown. My name's Gus Logue. Today I'll be joined by Hacker and Mia, maybe Tommy too, to break down the Jaguars' 20-13 win in Week 17 over the visiting Tennessee Titans. It came down to the wire. The Mason Rudolph and the Titans had a chance to score with a few seconds remaining, but Antonio Johnson made a really nice pass breakup on 4th and 10 to end the game. But Hacker, I feel like we got to start with Brian Thomas Jr., who's not just the star of this game, but obviously the star of the season for the Jaguars. But today he moved into 10th all-time in receiving yards by an NFL rookie. And he's also 12th in receiving touchdowns by an NFL rookie. And he joins Randy Moss, Odell Beckham Jr., and Jamar Chase as the only players in the Super Bowl era to record over 1,100 receiving yards and at least 10 touchdowns as a rookie. And so this is one of the just best rookie seasons we've seen from a skill position player this millennium. Just what are your thoughts on Brian Thomas Jr. in the win today?
Oh, he's an absolute stud. I mean, the wide receiver one talk here in Jacksonville that we have had for year after year after year is finally put to bed. They have a wide receiver one. And in fact, honestly, when next season rolls around, I'm not sure Brian Thomas Jr. won't be considered to be a top 10 wide receiver in the National Football League. He's absolutely incredible. He's got a swagger about him. He's got a confidence about him. He gave Brownlee the little too short sign
That was
on
awesome.
the touchdown. That was, the guy's a stud. And amidst a horrific season, which this has been, it's been a nightmare of a season. The one shining light has certainly been Brian Thomas Jr. And as you mentioned, 1,100 yards plus 10 touchdowns his rookie year. Only the fourth wide receiver in the Super Bowl era to do that, joining Randy Moss, Odell Beckham, and Jamar Chase. That tells you all you need to know about the company that Brian Thomas Jr. is in right now.
Yeah, he's unbelievable. And the thing that stands out to me is that early in the game, he was getting activated by getting like a reverse and then just basically a couple quick handoffs or short passes just to get him into space. And he was able to kind of follow blockers around the edge. So it was good to see that he was winning on those styles of plays, and the Jags were doing what they could to just get the ball into their best playmakers' hands. But then, really, as the game went on, you were able to see not just his playmaking talent, but his true wide receiver talent. He had the sideline catch for about, I think it was 30 yards from Mac Jones about halfway through the game. That was maybe the best throw that Jones has made as a Jaguar. But Thomas Jr. did a great job of just hauling it in down the sideline because he had really not a lot of steps on the defender. He was basically hip to hip with the guy who was covering him, but he did a good job of showing late hands, as in putting his hands up at the last possible second so that the defender couldn't, it would be harder for the defender to swat it away. So great job with the late hands, securing the catch, getting 2 feet inbounds. And then obviously the touchdown that you talked about where he did the little too short celebration was just gorgeous execution on a nice release on a slot fade. And again, good job of just finishing the play by him. And so I've talked before about how like he's already an amazing athlete, and not to discredit his play as a receiver, but what would make him be a Randy Moss type receiver, an Odell Beckham or Jamar Chase type guy, is to continue to hone in on fundamentals. And I thought that showed up in a big way today. And so, yeah, he's extremely exciting. I think that we could continue talking for hours about just how good this kid is. But I thought he could have had a third touchdown, honestly, on the one that went to Parker Washington. Mac Jones ended up, making a nice play, obviously, by getting the throw to Washington. But still, I thought that he could have layered it over the top of double coverage to Brian Thomas Jr. for what would have been his second touchdown of the game. But Parker Washington, I thought, did have a nice performance because he did have that touchdown grab. He had a big grab over the middle in the second half. What did you think of Parker Washington's performance, and was there any other skill players or just players in general that stood out from this game?
Yeah, I think it was the same thing you've seen the last couple of weeks. Brian Thomas Jr. was the star. That's the guy we're going to talk about. But Parker Washington was unbelievably solid again. Really nice touchdown catch in the back of the end zone. That's a nice little 1-2 combo with those guys. And look, there's going to be a really interesting conversation here in Jacksonville 1 week from today, right? We all know what that conversation is going to be about the future of Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke. And the interesting thing to me moving forward is when you look at it, Little Hack, you're not going to get on camera. All right. All right. There's Little Hack making his Duval Rundown debut. All right. Little Hack's fired up about the win. You look at the contribution of Parker Washington and Brian Thomas Jr., particularly BTJ, when the head coaching openings can come open next week. Yeah, the Jaguars have Trevor Lawrence. They also have Brian Thomas Jr., which I think is going to be, if not as appealing, almost as appealing, that 1-2 combo for potential head coach candidates.
Yeah, absolutely. Outside of all the other factors in terms of like ownership or location of the team, or whether it's a big or small market, definitely a big just factor for head coaching candidacies or positions is to the players on the team, and especially for an offensive coordinator or an offensive guy, they're going to want a quarterback, like you said, and Trevor Lawrence definitely fits the bill of a guy who can be a franchise leader for you. But then the next best thing is definitely having a guy to be able to catch the passes from him and kind of be able to connect to that connection. And so I'm sure that as much as offense coordinators might dream about having Trevor Lawrence as their quarterback, they probably dream even more so about what they can do to scheme Brian Thomas Jr. open and get him even more statistical production. And so that's going to definitely going to be a really exciting tandem or duo to watch in years to come. Potentially Parker Washington too, especially if Christian Kirk is released this offseason. But that's obviously a wait and see deal.
Well,
What did you think
let's
about?
not mistake, real quick, Gus. Let's not mistake things, though. These were two bad teams going at it today. It was a
Yeah,
fun game, right? I mean, it was fun. The Jaguars won the game, and we're never going to complain about that. These were two bad teams. But I said this on Hacker After Dark on, what was it, Friday? Yeah, it was on Friday. They won the game. You know how I feel about that. It cost them draft positioning. But for the fans that went to the game, particularly the fans that went today in a monsoon to see these two teams play, I think the Jaguars kind of owed it to the fans to leave with a home victory. The Jaguars hadn't won a home game but won all year. They've only won four the entirety of last year and this year. So I thought a home win today for the fans, albeit against a bad opponent, was a nice way to send the fans out. A nice thank you by the Jaguars.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's great for the players too. I'm excited to have Mia on in a few minutes to just talk about what she saw and heard in the locker room and also in post-game press conferences, but especially just what the vibes are in the locker room after this win. Because I agree that it's big for fans, especially the ones that were there in person, but it's even bigger for the players. And it's definitely helps to build a little bit of a momentum going into next year, even if there are questions about who's going to be running the show. We've talked at length about like draft position, whether we want wins or losses. I know where you stand, and I think that one important thing is that not just draft position, but it actually matters for scheduling a lot too,
Yeah.
which is something I hadn't thought of until today. Where the Jaguars are now likely going to face a third place schedule because they're likely going to finish third in their division, and so there's a pretty big drop off between like the third best teams in divisions versus the fourth best teams. Because sometimes the third best team, like Jacksonville, could rebound and all of a sudden be a playoff contender next year. Usually the fourth best teams are ones that aren't going to see the playoffs for a little bit. And so, I mean, at the same time, just like you're saying with the fans, it's hard to be rooting against losses, or against wins. But I think the Jaguars are going to be picking fifth overall and maybe fourth if the Browns end up winning their game. But it's interesting. Do you think that they would have been the first overall pick if they had lost and if the Giants end up losing or beating the Colts? Because they were winning by a field goal last time I saw that score.
Yeah, the whole strength of schedule thing is weird because again, I guess it doesn't matter that the Jaguars beat the Patriots. They don't take head to head into it. I don't believe. I don't know. The bottom line is they're still going to have a decent draft pick, right? They're still going to be in the top five, top six. So from that standpoint, you don't need a quarterback. Look, if you lost the game today, that helps you. I think Titans, I know the Titan fan base didn't want to win. I talked to a lot of Titans media that had no desire in winning this game. So they're probably celebrating it from that standpoint. But I just think the Jaguar fan base needed a W. I don't think today's win has any foreshadowing of what Shad Khan is going to do. I don't think if they get an emotional win over Tennessee at home, that's going to sway his decision on keeping Doug Peterson or Trent Baalke. I think he already probably knows what he's going to do next Sunday or next Monday. These next two games don't really have that much meaning. So from that standpoint, I'm not okay with the win today, but I'm happy for the fan base that they got the win today.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the next steps and what's going to happen a week from today, or more specifically, 8 days from today, on quote unquote Black Monday, the day after the final regular season game for most teams. Like this decision of whether Balky stays or goes. There was a really interesting report from CBS Sports' Jonathan Jones this morning before the game saying, I believe he said that the Jaguars were thinking about hiring a searching firm or hiring a firm to conduct their head coach searching process. And so that'd be interesting because, like, sure, Trent Baalke could theoretically be around for that to happen. But to me, like, that was a sign that if that does happen, it probably means Baalke's going to go and they're going to hire a searching firm to conduct a search for both head coach and a general manager. And so did you have a read on that report, or do you think it's still just very much, who knows, let's wait 8 days?
Well, I think the interesting thing that Jones also said in that report is the silence coming out of Jacksonville is absolutely deafening, right? There's just not a lot being said by owner Shad Khan about what's going on with the coaching search and whatever. The bottom line is I think the GM's gone. I think the head coach is gone. I think that's the direction they should go. I don't know how you justify it to the fan base to keep one or certainly both. But I've been surprised before. I mean, Dave Caldwell got 3 contracts here from Shad Khan, right? You know, Gus Bradley got 4 years here. So Shad's been loyal to a fault. I've said that repeatedly. So it would not shock me if either Baalke or even both Baalke and Peterson returned. But if you had to pin me down right now, 8 days out, I would probably think that wholesale changes are on the way.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. Robert Lamison commented on YouTube, if asking if people heard about the banner that flew across the stadium. Because of weather, I don't think it was really going around right before kickoff, but a few hours before kickoff, there was a plane flying around the stadium that had a banner that read "Shad Fire Baalke." I think it was as simple as that, or just I think it might have said something like "Do right by Jags fans." But yeah, the clown noses haven't been broken out quite yet, or at least not again. But obviously, we know where all of Jacksonville's fans stand.
You know, let me ask you something. Brian Thomas Jr., do we give Trent Baalke credit for that?
No, because if you knew that Brian Thomas was going to be this, then you would stay at 17 and pick him. Like, I think that it's kind of like the Ravens with Lamar Jackson. The Ravens actually picked Hayden Hurst ahead of Lamar Jackson in that draft. And so, yeah, it's great that you went out and got Lamar Jackson, but you don't deserve a ton of credit because if you really had a ton of faith in that guy, then you would have picked him earlier. And I know that with Baalke especially, he does he maneuvers in a way that's like he almost like poker, where he's playing not even his own hands, but more so like the players at the table's hands. And so I know a big reason that he traded back is because he felt comfortable that none of the teams from pick 17 to 23 were going to take a wide receiver. So I do give him some credit for that and the trade back to be able to still land the guy that he wanted at the 17th pick. But I don't know, like clearly Brian Thomas should have been a top 5 pick in the NFL. And so I think that the league at large just kind of misevaluated him and didn't give him as much credit as he probably deserved coming into the draft.
Take Joshua Hines-Allen out because obviously Baalke did not draft him. But aside from 41, every other player that you're legitimately excited about for the Jaguars moving forward, I mean, think about this. Trevor Lawrence, right? Trayvon Walker, Ventrell Miller, Jarian Jones, Mason Smith, Brian Thomas Jr., Parker Washington, Walker Little, Anton Harrison, you go on down the line. Those are Trent Baalke draft picks. And in the interest of fairness, I want Baalke gone too. I don't think he has earned the right to come back. I don't think he's done a particularly good job. But if we're going to be fair, a lot of guys that we're talking about, all the young nucleus of this team, are Trent Baalke drafted players. And I just think that needs to at least be brought up.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be bringing that up if/when the Jaguars have success in the post-Baalke era.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he'll be bringing that up to Shad Khan if there's any interviews or conversations that come up in the next week or so.
True that. It'll definitely something to watch in the next 8 days, or probably realistically in 8 days. But yeah, we'll see what that process ends up looking like as we get up to kind of decision day for the Jaguars. To go back to the game, I wanted to give a shout out to Travis Etienne because he also had a couple records broken himself. Not really truly records, but he did move into 4th place on Jacksonville's all-time rushing yards list, and he also moved into 4th place on Jacksonville's all-time receiving yards list by a running back. And in both cases, he surpassed Leonard Fournette who was a former first-round pick. And so ETN definitely had a nice game today. Several explosive runs, a couple runs that should have gone for longer, but he kind of slipped up in the slippery conditions. But I've been holding on to my Travis Etienne stock because he's definitely kind of like how I was talking about Brian Thomas Jr. Etienne is an amazing athlete. He really just needs to tap into fundamentals to fulfill his potential, I think. But he had a really nice game today. And someone asked me in the press box if I think that Etienne is going to be a Jaguar next year, and I said absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
I mean,
he's under contract.
He's under contracts. Like, maybe a team would be interested in sending like a late round pick for him for like a 1-year rental. But I would like, it would probably be a day 3 pick, if that. It would probably be like a conditional day 3 pick. And I would much rather have Travis Etienne on my team. I think it also fits with the conversation we were having earlier about just attractive carrots to potential head coaches, where Etienne might not be a top 10 player the way that Brian Thomas Jr. or Trevor Lawrence arguably are at their respective positions, but he's certainly a playmaker and someone that would be fun to scheme up for an offensive guy. And so I'm excited to see how he continues to grow too. A player that I was disappointed with, honestly, today was Brenton Strange, because I know that the statistics from 2 weeks ago weren't all that impressive, where he had, I think it was 11 or 12 catches for 73 yards. So pretty low average yards per target and yards per completion. But still, like, I thought it was solid tape and he could turn into a good possession receiver in the passing game. But he had a fumble last week and was seemingly benched after that. And he really didn't show up today. I feel like he had 1 target and 0 catches, if I remember correctly. And so on one hand, it's good that Parker Washington showed up as kind of like a young player who could emerge as a starter in the future. But on the other hand, I thought that Brenton Strange didn't really do a lot. Did you have any other thoughts on players today?
No, I agree. I think Parker Washington, you feel a lot better about him maybe replacing Christian Kirk in the future than you do about Brenton Strange maybe replacing Evan Ingram. Obviously, since Ingram left, that tight end position has not been what it was when Ingram was there. And you're right, Strange had a really good game a couple weeks ago, but obviously not very much the last 2 games. Look, if we're giving shout-outs, give a shout-out to Joshua Hines-Allen, right?
Yep.
You know, he absolutely took over the game there for about 3 or 4 plays, a sack, a tackle for loss. Thought he did some nice things. Jarian Jones had another nice game today. Devin Lloyd with an interception. So there were some nice things. I mean, look, that Titan team, yuck. They have got a lot of work to do this offseason. So let's understand that. But having said that, the Jaguars have won 4 games this year, Gus, 3 of them against the AFC South, right? I mean, if they were to go to Indy and win next week, they sweep Tennessee and potentially sweep Indianapolis. That's something. I don't know what that really means in the grand scheme of things, but it's certainly a cliff note, right?
Right.
But again, Devin Lloyd, Joshua Hines-Allen, and the fact they got their 3rd win against the AFC South was things I noted today.
Yeah. Also, shout out to Jordan Jefferson, the defensive tackle, who had the pass deflection. Yeah, pass tip at the line of scrimmage on the Devin Lloyd interception. He's quietly had a pretty nice season as a rookie, and I think that he's probably a long-term contingency plan for Devon Hamilton at nose/defensive tackle, similar to the way we talk about Christian Kirk and Parker Washington, and then maybe Evan Ingram and Brenton Strange. And so Jefferson is certainly a young guy to keep an eye on. And then, yeah, Hines-Allen, I thought, was brilliant the entire game. I know that fans will sometimes give him slack for kind of being inconsistent in terms of when he shows up, but I thought for all 60 minutes, he was really putting an effect on Mason Rudolph. But in the running game as well, he had a great tackle for loss in the 3rd quarter, I think it was. And now he had 1 sack today, which means he is 2.5 sacks away from Tony Braxton's all-time sack record in Jacksonville. So, I mean, he needs 3 to surpass it next week against Indianapolis, who will be starting either Anthony Richardson or Joe Flacco. That's kind of up in the air as of now, I think. But it'll at least be a really good storyline entering next offseason, assuming he's not able to break the record this year. Then surely he'll be able to break it very early next season. And so he was just dominating J.C. Latham, the first-round rookie for Tennessee, all day. Because I talked about how he had a really good matchup against the Jets' first-round tackle, Alu Fashanu, and he kind of didn't really show up against that one. So it was really good to see him show up today, especially against kind of a weaker competition, or at least less experienced competition. Cam Little also had a performance. John Ladisa said on YouTube, Cam Little's a top 5 draft pick by Balky and says a lot about how he drafts. It's probably fair. But yeah, Cam Little had at least 2 field goals, if not 3. But Hacker, did anything change your mind today in terms of like what Jacksonville's biggest needs are entering the offseason based on player performances?
No, I mean, look, the crazy thing is, and I didn't realize it was this few, but they talked about on the broadcast, Evan Ingram, Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis only played 4 games together, right? You
Hmm.
never really got to see what that looked like. um, so you don't really know. I mean, if all those guys come back, we don't know about Kirk, but I mean, with Davis's contract, I would assume he's probably back. Ingram and obviously Trevor's back. The emergence of Parker Washington, obviously the emergence of Brian Thomas Jr. You need some help on the offensive line, the interior of the offensive line. You know, it hasn't gotten any younger. Um, did we see enough from Cooper Hodges to think he's going to be able to replace Brandon Sheriff next year? I don't know. A couple of season-ending injuries for Cooper Hodges. Could you potentially need to do something at right guard? On the defensive line, certainly the interior of the defensive line, the edge all over there. Maybe to add another linebacker. Corner, I think, is certainly an issue. Are you comfortable with Monteric Brown being the starter opposite Tyson Campbell? Look, there's a lot of directions. Safety, by the way, is another one that they probably need to do something. So there's a lot of areas that this team's going to need improvement in. It's obviously going to be who is the head coach here, whether it's Doug Peterson or somebody else. Is it Trent Baalke making the decisions or somebody new? And that's obviously answers we're going to be getting here in the next, I would think, 10 days max. And then at that point, you can kind of start mapping out the offseason trajectory, the offseason plan, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, I've got a random question for you, especially with bowl games going on and the college football playoffs going on. If the Jaguars, they're probably going to pick around 5th overall, just based on what we know right now. But if they were going to pick at like between the 10 and 12 range and Ashton Jeanty was on the board, how would you feel about picking him with a first round pick?
Boy, man. I mean, again, you got a first round pick invested in ETN, right? You got a third round pick invested in Bigsby. Um, I mean, if he's truly the best available guy, I mean, I can't imagine ETN, Bigsby, and Genty would be here next year, right? You'd probably trade one of them at that point. That's interesting. I think there are much more pressing needs than that, but that's certainly an interesting thought. I probably wouldn't do that, but I can probably see where you're going there.
Yeah, I think I would lean no as well. It's just I feel like the conversation is: do you really believe in Genty as a prospect as being a long-term difference maker and someone that truly deserves to be viewed without positional value considered? And I know that the positional value arguments, especially in recent years around the NFL, have grown kind of overbearing and a bit annoying. But it really does matter, especially when you do have a former first rounder in ETN and a former third rounder in Bigsby already under contract for next year. But I think it's just too much of a luxury pick, especially considering you need to invest in the trenches on both sides of the ball. But I feel like Ted McMillan or like a top 5-ish wide receiver might be a luxury pick worth taking, because my thought was like after Tim Jones had that first catch in the first quarter, like they really need to add more depth, even if they keep Christian Kirk, Evan Engram, and Gabe Davis. Like those guys all aren't going to stay around forever. And like I just don't like Brian Thomas Jr. shouldn't be relied upon as a one-man show. It would be great if he has a minimum of 10 targets in every game for the next 10 years. But realistically, especially when you get to playoff time and you're playing real playoff teams with a much better secondaries than what the Titans trotted out today, you don't you need more than just one guy. Even if your one guy is a walking all pro, you really need a more well balanced attack. And so I wouldn't mind seeing the Jags go with a luxury pick on offense, especially a skill position player to pair with Trevor Lawrence long term. But receiver definitely makes a lot more sense than running back.
Well, yeah, receiver does, and then the offensive tackle question, right? You got money invested in Walker Little, at least a little bit, right? They extended him. You got Anton Harrison on right. Does that take offensive tackle off the board if you're drafting in the top, top 5, top 6? I don't know. I can't imagine, you'd pay Walker Little 15 million a year to ride the pine next year. You got money invested in Ezra Cleveland too. So what do you do on the offensive line if the best available guy is one of those tackles?
Yeah, I mean, trenches would never be a bad pick in my opinion, but We got Mia standing by from the field to break down what she's seen from the Jaguars' locker room after their win over the Titans. Hacker, I know you've got the fifth quarter at Hurricanes Grill and Bar over in San Marco tonight. So everyone to make sure to check out the fifth quarter starting around 6 o'clock with Hacker, Coach Campo, and Leon Searcy. Appreciate you coming on, Hacker. We got one more of these, but really thanks a lot for sticking through and talking about BTJ and the rest of the team with me this season.
It's a victory Sunday night, 4-12, man. It feels wonderful.
That's right. All right, to Hacker, Lil Hacker, thanks again. We'll see you guys next Sunday, and we'll bring on Mia. Mia, hello. Is it raining on you, or is the weather not bad?
As of right now, Gus, we're doing okay. I think our bigger concern is the turf management team maybe making a little noise behind me. But aside from that, it is dry at long last here at Everbank Stadium. Hopefully it didn't rain on you too much as you made your way to your car. And it's a Jaguars victory. And honestly, surprisingly, after a victory, it was one of the quieter locker rooms. Not quiet, because it was certainly boisterous, but a lot of players celebrated and got out. Now, granted, I did go to Doug Peterson's press conference today because it was the quickest he's actually gotten out of the locker room and quickly to his media availability. And so knowing the locker room wouldn't open for 5 minutes, I was like, all right, let's go to Doug. And we were with Doug for probably about 10 minutes, so missed like 5 minutes of locker room. And by the time I got into the locker room, and after a 6-minute interview with Travis Etienne, everybody had largely cleared out. So perhaps the biggest note I can bring to you, if you saw Daniel Thomas on the scooter making his way into Everbank Stadium this morning, that actually was a gift from Logan Cook. He gifted the entire punt team with electric scooters. So shout out to Logan. If anybody wants to give me an electric scooter, I would gladly accept the electric scooter, be cruising about the neighborhood. But yeah, we talked to Travis Etienne. He said, look, he understands those who will say draft position, this, that, and the other. But he said it makes coming to work a little bit easier when you're coming off of a victory, especially knowing you have that 1 week left. He said this way you can actually go home, be happy with your family. And, you know, emotionally for these guys, I think we often forget about the human side of this, that it makes it difficult to come to work each and every Monday when you don't know where you stand, you don't know where the team stands, and you're coming off of yet another disappointing loss. And so the common refrain in the locker room, just that this team finally finished, that's what Doug Peterson echoed at his press conference as well. That has been the struggle for this team over the better part of 16 games, let alone the last 5-6 weeks, the ability to finish. And hopefully you're hearing me, because we've got Red Zone on here. We've got the trucks behind me, so hopefully you guys can hear me because a lot going on here at the bank, but maybe not so much going on in the locker room.
It's coming through the audio fine for me, so hopefully same goes for all of our listeners and watchers. But yeah, Doug Peterson talked earlier this week, or it might have been after the game with the loss against the Raiders, about how the team has just always been 1 or 2 plays away from finishing games. That's kind of been the key for them this season in terms of losing all the close games. Before today, they were 2-9, I believe, in 1-score games this year, and certainly wasn't a good record last year either, especially after Trevor Lawrence and Christian Kirk went down. But like you saw it with like the play that Antonio Johnson made to pretty much win the game on 4th and 10. And then obviously Brian Thomas Jr. made a handful of big plays, but especially that slot fade touchdown. They were able to make a couple of games to really finish, and so it was good to see. I agree. Like Hacker was saying, good for the fans, especially the ones that are there, and totally agree with that. But even more so, like just super happy for the players, because it certainly makes coming to work a little bit easier, and hopefully they're able to build a little bit of momentum going into next year, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Doug Peterson did reference, you know, maybe the 2-minute defense could have looked a little bit better at the end of the first half, end of the second half in his press conference just now. Travis Etienne said, you know, maybe our 4-minute offense could have perhaps moved the ball a little bit more in that fourth quarter, and that would have kept the defense off the field at the end of the game. Unfortunately, 4-minute offense in the fourth quarter has been an underrated storyline and struggle for the Jags, I think, over the better part of the last 2 years or so. But ultimately, a win's a win. And, you know, as one reporter pointed out to Doug Peterson in his press conference, somehow, some way, the Jags have an opportunity to go 4-2 in the AFC South, despite their current 4-12 record. And if that doesn't say all you need to know about that division right now, and why, if there are to be changes made, there will be head coach and GM candidates who look at this division, look at the state of the Houston Texans, the team that's already locked up the division, and they will say, I can go in there, I can make this a winner. And Look, it's just the reality of it. And yes, could it be easier said than done? Most definitely. I think once upon a time, Doug Peterson and Trent Baalke felt the same way. I know Jaguar fans felt that way after 2022, but ultimately, it's a fascinating situation we find ourselves in for a division, excuse me, that so many believe would be one of the best in football in the early goings of this year.
Totally. Even if you thought that there was not going to be any Super Bowl contenders emerging from this division, I think the general consensus is that it would be a very competitive division from the first place team to the fourth place team. Obviously, that hasn't really happened, but it's definitely another factor. Hacker and I were talking earlier about just what makes Jacksonville such an attractive landing spot for a coach or a general manager. But I did want to ask you about those potential changes because of what we heard and saw this morning. First of all, there was that plane flying around the stadium saying Shad fired Baalke, which was assumingly set up by a fan. But then there was also a report from Jonathan Jones of CBS Sports saying that things have been very quiet coming out of Jacksonville and that the team might be considering hiring a search firm. And so what did you think of that report? And thoughts on that?
Yeah, it lines up largely with what I've reported and what I believe to be the case, which is Shad Khan has largely made up his mind. He's made his decision, but because, as was reported after that not devastating, just abysmal, I should say, loss, that's the right adjective, the abysmal loss to the Detroit Lions right before the bye, because there really was no suitable interim candidate in-house. And because ultimately, as we saw with Dave Caldwell and Doug Marrone once upon a time, Shad Khan believes in if you created this mess, you're going to have to find your way out of it or at the very least sit in it. That's largely his edict to Dave and Doug once upon a time was, okay, it's on you to fix this thing or to try to strip it down. And then if you win, great. And I think that's kind of what the last 7 weeks have been, or 5 weeks, whatever it is, since the bye. That Shad Khan has said, okay, if you win the next 5-6 weeks, great, maybe we'll reevaluate. But I think his mind has been made up. As I've reported, Josina Anderson and her cryptic tweets have reported. The back channels have been worked, not just by the Jaguars, but by a couple different organizations around the National Football League, but certainly around here in Jacksonville. As I've described it to more than one confidant around the league, I've described it as there's blood in the water. The sharks are circling. And that has been the case since September, but certainly it has heated up since that loss to the Lions, and it hasn't stopped. And so personally, I thought the Jonathan Jones report was spot on. Appreciated the insight from Amy Trask as well, of course, a friend of Helmets and Heels. And at this juncture, we wait the next 7 days and we'll see what happens on Monday. I will tell you, and I was trying to get clarification, and I really couldn't. I know Doug Peterson has a little bit of an eye thing going on right now. In listening to his press conference, I couldn't tell if it was just a byproduct of the sty he has or if he was emotional in his post-game press conference. He came across that way to a couple different reporters, including myself. That's why I asked him the question about the emotional locker room. And so it's, and I posted the video on my X account of him and Trent Baalke embracing going into the locker room. I'm sure there will be those of you who read into it and think, oh my goodness, they know they're safe now. I did not read into it as such. I looked at it as the first time I've seen the two of them together in a couple weeks, at least in person myself, seeing it with my own two eyes. And so, in my estimation, I don't think a win today is going to change all that much, but I do think it can help the morale of the players who most certainly will be here next year.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that circumstance, it's kind of a win-win situation. Like, sure, they might have dropped a little bit in draft position. We did talk earlier about there is kind of a big difference in terms of scheduling of facing a third-place team versus a fourth-place team when you're facing other divisions in the NFL next year. But, yeah, this definitely seemed like a good day for the Jaguars. And definitely shout out to you because, as you said, Jones's reporting is definitely similar to what you've been saying for weeks now. And you've been saying the strongest out of anyone in the station, stronger than me too. But even people who we work with have been like, I don't know, gotta wait to see in terms of whether significant changes will indeed be coming in 8 days or not. And I know you've been holding firm, so shout out to you, assuming that you'll be right on that front. But we shall see. Was there any player performances that stood out to you, Mia, before we get out of here? Obviously, Brian Thomas Jr. had an incredible day. We started out the show talking about him, but did you notice anyone else that deserves a shout out?
Yeah, credit to Parker Washington. I mean, the body control continues to be off the charts. And I know you tweeted it. The sound that you're hearing is people searching Christian Kirk contract across the city of Jacksonville. I mean, Parker Washington only fell to the 6th round. And not that he would have been selected in round 2 or 3. But he fell to the 6th round because of an injury that really sidelined him during the pre-draft process. He's as hard a worker as you're going to find in that locker room, and just incredible body control to haul in that touchdown right to my left, right here in that end zone, the south corner of the end zone, and so, or the south end zone. And so, yeah, I want to give a shout out to him. I thought Jarian Jones came on strong in the first quarter, up and down the rest of the game, but I thought a couple of really nifty plays for him back to back to back on that opening defensive drive. Certainly the tackle for loss sequence from Josh Hines-Allen was impressive. Now 2.5 sacks away from the Jaguars' all-time career sacks record. Don't know if he gets that next week against the Indianapolis Colts, which I know will be disappointing for him. But again, like we just said, for a player who is going to be back here next year in Josh Hines-Allen, a win today emotionally, you need that lift after weeks and weeks of not just losses, and even the win over the Titans in Nashville that felt like a win, but also a loss because it was only a 10-6 win. You need that moral uplift to get back on the horse and go back to work on Monday.
No doubt. Well, Mia, I'll see you tomorrow for work on Monday. Appreciate your insight as always. Mia will be back not just next Sunday for our post-game recap in Week 18, the Jaguars' season finale at Indianapolis, but also on Thursday to preview that matchup. We'll also be here on Tuesday for another episode of Duval Rundown. Thank you so much to everyone who stuck with us the whole year. Go Jags, and Happy New Year.